Always question authority and the dumbest bill in America. That's right, you heard that correctly. Always question authority. This is Mark Fisher with Mark and the Millennials, and the millennial joining me today is, of course, Christopher Hopkins, our producer. This podcast is called Always Question Authority. Yes, that is uniquely American, to always question authority. That's what I was always taught. By the way, that actually comes from liberal philosophy, that you naturally would get to the truth by questioning things, including authority. Can we do it better? Is what they are saying correct? Shouldn't I ask questions to make sure that there's transparency and that things are going the way they're supposed to? All of the normal things that your parents would tell you to do so that you would develop what? Critical thinking skills. Apparently not so in the gubernatorial debate in the state of Virginia. The state of Virginia has off-year elections, which means the elections are on odd years, and every single state legislator is up for election, as is the governor of Virginia. Terry McAuliffe, the former Clinton hack, he's a Clintonite. He's been with the Clintons for his entire career and has made millions as a result of his connections with the Clintons. He didn't start out rich, but he sure got that way as a result of government. He's already served one term in Virginia. And in Virginia, you are termed out after one term. You can take a break and then run again. You just can't run in 2 consecutive terms. McAuliffe, his opponent is Glenn Youngkin. Well, they had a debate last night, podcast listeners. And apparently, according to Terry McAuliffe, when Glenn Youngkin was debating Terry McAuliffe, and they were speaking about the idea of schools and what's happening in the school systems throughout Virginia, everything from inappropriate material that's being taught in the schools, CRT, critical race theory, being taught in the schools. This is a huge issue, podcast listeners, in the state of Virginia. It's a massive issue. And so Glenn Youngkin brought that up, and he brought up how school boards are trying to shut down the parents. They're trying to muzzle the parents. Terry McAuliffe literally said exactly what the Democrat Party thinks nationwide about this issue. You will not believe what happened in that debate and what Terry McAuliffe said. Podcast listeners, listen closely. Here it is.
Veto books, Glenn, not to be knowledge about it, also take them off the shelves. And I'm not going to let parents come into schools and actually take books out and make their own decisions.
You vetoed it.
So, yeah, I stopped the bill that I don't think parents should be telling schools what they should teach.
I don't think parents should be telling schools what they should teach. That was the Democrat candidate for governor of Virginia, Terry McAuliffe. This is, podcast listeners, this is exactly the talking points of the entire Democrat Party and of school boards that are controlled by these woke leftists across the country. Namely, that once you provide your child to the school system, once your child is dropped off, you are surrendering your child to government. You are surrendering your child and your authority as parent. And now, after the teachers and the administrators and the school boards, they get to do whatever they want. And you can't question authority. You can't question the curricula. You can't do that. That's not allowed. Yet that's precisely what school boards are supposed to do. School boards are supposed to be the conduit between the parents and the administration and teachers at the school system. Obviously, it makes the most sense to go directly to your kid's teacher when you have an issue. But when an issue is systemic, when there's a policy systemic issue, such as CRT that's, creeping its way into your public school system, as an example, or books that celebrate pedophilia that are in your kid's library, which, by the way, in normal times, the people that put those books in there would be arrested. But, Democrats don't think that you as a parent should be able to go to the school board and have any input about the curriculum. It's unbelievable that McAuliffe did this. It's just unbelievable. So, podcast listeners, there were all kinds of folks online that were criticizing Terry McAuliffe. And by the way, this is a really close governor's race, right? This race in Virginia is razor tight because Virginia, of course, has been trending purple. And Democrats, they smell their ability to be able to turn Virginia into New York or to California or to Illinois. So McAuliffe was criticized online after saying he doesn't believe parents should tell schools what to teach. Terry McAuliffe and Glenn Youngkin sparred during their second and final debate of Virginia's governor's race on Tuesday, but it was one comment on schools by McAuliffe, the Democrat candidate, that drew the ire of conservatives. By the way, it wasn't just conservatives. Democrats, too, are not happy with a lot of this nonsense that's being taught. Quote, "I don't think parents should be telling schools what they should teach," McAuliffe, who previously served as governor from 2014 to 2018, said during the debate in Alexandria, Virginia. McAuliffe made the remarks in response to Youngkin, the Republican candidate who argued that parents should be more involved in the decisions of local school districts. Conservative social media responded, yeah, exactly. I mean, folks, I've even played in a previous podcast a clip of my own public school system, school board that's basically saying to parents, we don't want to be here into the wee hours of the morning listening to you talk. We don't have time to listen to you. This is a business meeting. It's unbelievable. So not only that, but in Fairfax County Public Schools, which is in Virginia, Stacey Langdon, a parent, spoke at a school board meeting. We played this previously in a podcast, but you need to hear it again because it goes to what Terry McAuliffe, who's running for governor of Virginia, just said. You don't have a right to question anything. Here's that clip from Stacey Langdon, a parent, very angry parent, speaking at a school board meeting. Here it is.
After seeing a September 9th school board meeting in Texas on pornography in the schools, I decided to check the titles at my child's school, Fairfax High School. The books were available, and we checked them out. Both of these books include pedophilia, sex between men and boys. Both books describe different acts. One book describes a 4th grade boy performing oral sex on an adult male. The other book has detailed illustrations of a man having sex with a boy. The illustrations include fellatio, sex toys, masturbation, and violent nudity. Pedophilia here. From the author, Maya Kobabe, quote, "I can't wait to have your cock in my mouth. I am going to give you the blowjob of your life, and then I want you inside me," end quote. From the author, Jonathan Evison, "What if I told you I touched another guy's dick? What if I told you I sucked it? I was 10 years old, but it's true. I sucked Doug Goebel's dick, the real estate guy, and he sucked mine too." This is not an oversight at Fairfax High School.
Sorry. May I please make a point of, there are children in the audience here.
Do not interrupt my time. Do not interrupt my time.
So that was Stacey Langdon at Fairfax County Public Schools school board meeting, and the school board members were saying, you can't say that here. There are children. Yeah, but these are the same children that have access to the school's library where you placed these books. And you've chosen to put these particular books there, obviously, for a reason. That's why we're calling this podcast Always Question Authority. Always. That's the only way a democracy, that's the only way our republic can survive. It's the only way it can thrive is if you question everything. But increasingly across this country, you have school boards, and now Terry McAuliffe has proven as a gubernatorial candidate in Virginia that you as a parent don't have a right to question authority, let alone to have any input on curricula whatsoever. It's unbelievable. Case in point, in California, parents request a judge to block the public schools from asking students to pray to Aztec gods. 3 California parents are suing to prevent the state's public school system from reciting prayers to Aztec deities that have been worshipped with human sacrifice, arguing that doing so violates the U.S. and state constitutions. The issue emerged earlier this year when researcher Chris Rufo reported on that particular aspect of the state's ethnic studies curriculum, which we've talked about before and made it one of our dumbest bills. As Fox News previously noted, the curriculum suggests chants that invoke the deity Tezcatlipoca. I think I said that correctly. Tezcatlipoca is an Aztec god that was honored with human sacrifices. According to World History Encyclopedia, an impersonator as Tezcatlipoca would be sacrificed with his heart removed to honor the deity. Yeah, so his heart was removed during the ceremony. In Aztec mythology, Tezcatlipoca is the brother of this other name, Aztec name, all of whom appear to be invoked in the chant. The Thomas More Society, which represents the parents, described the model curriculum as blatantly unconstitutional. Our clients are not opposed to having students learn about different cultures and religions, obviously, including the practices of the Aztecs, said Paula Jana, partner at Lamandry and Jana LLP, and Thomas More Society's special counsel. Quote, but the California State Board of Education's approved ethnic studies model curriculum goes far beyond that. By directing students to pray to Aztec deities, this portion of the ethnic studies model curriculum is not only offensive, but blatantly unconstitutional. Both the California Board of Education and the Department of Education are listed as defendants in the complaint. It seeks a temporary restraining order that would prevent defendants from authorizing, promoting, or permitting the use of Aztec prayers and the Aztec chant in California's public schools. So there you have it. You have teachers, right, that allegedly are teaching you about ethnic studies, but really it's more about trying to get you to forget about your own faith and to do what? Pray to an Aztec god where they sacrifice a human being at the altar? I mean, this is what happens. This is what happens when parents aren't available to question authority. This is what happens when parents are shut down by school boards and they're not allowed to go in front of them and speak openly and freely. And this is what happens when you have COVID and school boards say, oh, because of COVID, you can't come in and speak here because of the fact that, you know, there's COVID. So only we can be here in this meeting and talk business. You're not allowed to come here because we make all the decisions. And once again, once you give our kids to the public school system, you have surrendered them. And that is why we must always question authority as conservatives. Case in point of what our public school system is providing, what our public school system is developing, what our public school system is producing. In Prince George's County, Maryland, there is a Six Flags, okay? There's a Six Flags park. That Six Flags park is an amusement park. And every year, a solid 6 weeks or so prior to Halloween, they have what's called Fright Nights. And typically it's on weekends, I believe. That might be during the week too, but nonetheless, the park turns into this event where people dress up as ghouls and zombies and so forth. And they're presumably actors that work for the park, and they try to scare you. And you pay to get in. It's another way for the park to make money. And it draws predominantly, the park does, predominantly teenagers, middle schoolers, as well as high schoolers. That's primarily who goes because it's in the evening. And quite frankly, it's not what I would call the safest area where this park is located for a variety of reasons. Nonetheless, Six Flags in Prince George's County, Maryland had their Fright Night, and it turned into chaos. Chaos. Chaos because there were middle school girls and boys and high school girls and boys, almost exclusively black, by the way, who just decided to start to riot and break things and beat the living heck out of each other. And who knows why? Who knows why? But nonetheless, we have a clip from this. This is Fox 5 reporting, and you'll hear the background information if you're just listening, and envision and try to visualize two girls who are 14 and a bunch of other 14-year-old girls literally beating the you-know-what out of each other and thinking that's okay. And then teenage boys breaking the windows of cars and denting cars and jumping on top of them, of which, of course, you know, permanently dents the hood or the top of the car as well. Imagine all of that going on, but, you know, like dozens and dozens and dozens of people doing this. And that's what they're describing here in Fox 5 reporting. Here is the clip.
Police say not a single person was arrested, even though in some of the videos you see Prince George's County police officers trying to get a handle on this out-of-control situation. I've talked to some who were there on Saturday night, and they tell me many of these people you see fighting were 14 and 15 years old. They say they don't know what led up to this, especially because it's multiple different fights. Fright Fest was shut down about an hour early as a result of all this.
Yeah, so Fright Fest was shut down, and Six Flags in Prince George's County, Maryland, ended up issuing a statement saying, well, this is really an event that's supposed to be taking place in the evening at dusk and then also when it gets dark. But we're not going to do that anymore. We're going to close it much earlier because of the violence that has occurred. So folks, once again, it was predominantly black teens, and there were multiple fights. They were not necessarily related to one another. And then it just turned into bedlam and a complete kind of riot for no reason. And this goes to our public school system, of what is not being taught in our public school system and why parents need to be involved. Namely, this thing called character education. There used to be this thing taught in public school systems called character education. That character education dealt with what makes good character, what makes a person a good person, what makes them a responsible person. And they would teach that in public schools. And increasingly it's in private schools, but even some private schools, of course, are receiving some pushback from many of the woke administrators of not wanting to teach it. And when you don't have this being taught at home, the school system's the only other place you can teach it. But of course, the school systems are not only failing to teach character education, but they're trying to teach you to pray to Aztec gods instead. You know, so then you have these people going to a Fright Fest and they decide to just go crazy. It's unbelievable. And that's why this is so important that we, the people, start to question authority more. Case in point, NBA star Jonathan Isaac speaks common sense about the COVID vaccine. By the way, I have never heard anyone who is a non-physician, a non-medical expert, speak so measured and so common sensely, if you will, about the COVID vaccine and their decision not to get it. Their decision not to get it based on their willingness to question authority, right? To use all of the information that they were given, use critical thinking skills and question authority. Here is Jonathan Isaac, who is a player in the NBA at the Orlando Magic. And here he is giving a press conference about why he isn't getting vaccinated. You tell me if this isn't epic. Here's the clip.
What is it about the vaccine that makes you hesitant to get it?
I would start with I've had COVID in the past, and so our understanding of antibodies, of natural immunity has changed a great deal from the onset of the pandemic, and is still evolving. I understand that the vaccine would help if you catch COVID, and you'll be able to have less symptoms from contracting it. But with me having COVID in the past and having antibodies with my current age group and physical fitness level, it's not necessarily a fear of mine. Taking the vaccine, like I said, it would decrease my chances of having a severe reaction, but it does open me up to the, albeit rare chance, but the possibility of having an adverse reaction to the vaccine itself. I don't believe that being unvaccinated means infected, or being vaccinated means uninfected. You can still catch COVID with or without having the vaccine. I would say, honestly, the craziness of it all in terms of not being able to say that it should be everybody's fair choice without being demeaned or talked crazy to doesn't make one comfortable to do what said person is telling them to do.
Yes, so that's Orlando Magic NBA player Jonathan Isaac. And Jonathan Isaac just saying, look, I'm in the prime of my life. I'm in perfect condition. I had COVID. And he goes and provides all of the information, and everything he said was true. Everything this gentleman said was true, including we are still getting more information as time goes on. And there is this distinct chance that if you get the vaccine, once you've had COVID, especially when you're in the prime of your life, there could be some negative, needless to say, consequences. And so Bradley Beal of the Washington Wizards also had a press conference, if you will, or a talk in front of the press about this very same issue. And what he did was Bradley Beal used the Socratic method, where he started giving his reasons, first and foremost, of why he's not vaccinated, because he had COVID, and then also used the Socratic method to ask the press what they thought. And it's really interesting when you hear the press give feedback because, you know, naturally they're all woke. You can't work now as a member of any of the sports press agencies without, you know, being on the left. And it's not being part of the left to listen to a couple of black guys talk about how they're not getting the vaccine and give really incredibly thoughtful reasons as to why. Here's Bradley Beal, the Washington Wizards. We have that clip, and here it is.
Every player, every person in this world is going to make their own decision for themselves. I would like an explanation to, you know, people with vaccines. Why are they still getting COVID? If that's something that we are supposed to highly be protected from. Like, it's funny that, oh, it reduces your chances of going to the hospital. It doesn't eliminate anybody from getting COVID, right? So is everybody in here vaxxed? I would assume, right? So you all can still get COVID, right?
We're less likely to die or go to the hospital.
Okay, but you can still get COVID. Right. So, and you can still pass it along with the vax, right? I'm just asking the question.
Oh, sure. And so, like, having COVID back around the Olympics, like, that basically just saying, like, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but having it change your opinion one way or another, like, did it kind of reemphasize I don't need the vaccine because of that?
No, that wasn't the case. I mean, yeah, I had it, but that doesn't mean I can't get it again, you know? I mean, it's no different than somebody with a vaccine. Like, I developed the antibodies for it, so my chances will be less likely now as well, right? But it's still a possibility I may get it. Just like there are players and coaches and staff who are vaxxed and missing camp right now because of it.
So those are two NBA stars, Jonathan Isaac and Bradley Beal, who are questioning authority. And then you have the sports media there that is questioning them about something so incredibly personal, namely what kind of medicine you want to put inside of your body. And they give not only very measured responses, not only really commonsensical responses, incredibly smart and thoughtful responses. And then Bradley Beal uses the Socratic method to go right back in the media and ask them questions. And then naturally they're like, wait a minute, you know, I can't believe he's asking me questions. He's questioning an authority. You know, we're supposed to be just all on the same train going in the same direction. And that's just the way things are supposed to happen in America. No, actually, that's not the way things are supposed to happen in America. And this is a very complicated issue. And it's nothing to do with race, because as you can see, two NBA stars, it has nothing to do with religion, except in some cases, obviously, with the vaccine. It has nothing to do with anyone else. It is your decision at this particular point in time, especially since if you want to get a vaccine, you can have one. And also, there's also an article, which we're not going to read, but it deals with the NFL. Apparently, the NFL has these statistics about how many people have vaccine cards. And apparently, many of those cards are fake, and they have no idea. So you see what's happening in sports across the country. I mean, people are pushing back for a variety of reasons, probably because, as the two NBA stars said, they had COVID. So next up, podcast listeners, General Milley, of course, is being grilled at the United States Senate. This happened yesterday. And he admits he spoke with a bunch of anti-Trump authors. General Milley did. And it's really kind of a fascinating thing. And I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this subject matter because so many others have. But I have a very different perspective on this particular issue. Because naturally, Congress brought Milley in front of them to talk about two things: Afghanistan and whether he had conversations with China about Trump wanting to start a war and how he was going to give them advance notice. Those were the two issues, right? And obviously, those are really important issues. But there's something else that the press and others really aren't talking about. So we had this exchange between General Milley and Senator Marsha Blackburn of Tennessee. And Senator Marsha Blackburn of Tennessee asks General Milley about whether he spoke with those anti-Trump authors. And this really, to me, goes to the broader and larger issue of what is systemically wrong with the top brass in the military. We have that clip, and here it is.
General Milley, yes or no to this? Did you talk to Bob Woodward or Robert Costa for their book, Peril?
Woodward, yes. Costa, no.
Did you talk to Carol Leonick and Philip Rucker for their book, Alone Can I Fix It?
Yes.
Did you talk to Michael Bender for his book is Frankly, We Did Win This Election, The Inside Story of How Trump Lost? Yes.
Yes.
Or no? And were you accurately represented in these books?
I haven't read any of the books, so I don't know. I've seen press reporting of it. I haven't read the books.
Let's have you read the books and then let us know if you are accurately presented and portrayed.
Happy to do that.
So look, why would a military officer who is currently serving, and he's serving at the highest level in the United States military and government, why would he or she speak with individuals writing books that are nothing but politically motivated pieces of work, right? Why would you do that? You're not supposed to actually do that as a military officer. You're not actually supposed to provide information to these individuals who are writing these books to try to take out a sitting president or a sitting United States senator, because then what you're doing as a military officer is you're crossing the line and you're engaging completely and utterly in the political process. You need to either be a politician or you need to be a military person. You can't be both. You can't be crossing over into the political realm. And that's exactly what this guy has done, Milley, from the very beginning. And this is really scary because when you watch his body language, when Marsha Blackburn of Tennessee and others are asking him questions, he looks as though he believes that he's not answerable to anyone. He actually gives that body language, like, I'm not really answerable to you elected officials. Well, actually, he is. He is. Yet that is the impression that Milley gives when he's there at the Senate. It's like he's got his own little world in the military and he gets to do whatever he wants because technically, as far as he's concerned, he's the one that's really running things. He gets to take out politicians by providing information to authors and others. And he gets to do that because it's his decision who serves as an elected official. It's not the people's decision. This is bad stuff. Just based on that, and I can't believe no one even talked about that, by the way. Obviously, it was really important to talk about his relationship with China and, of course, how he said that he was going to give them, potentially said that he was going to give them heads up about Trump wanting to attack China. It's also very relevant how incompetent he and others were in the Afghanistan withdrawal. Those are all obvious, okay? But there's the much greater issue of why someone in the military is really a full-time politician trying to decide who wins and who loses as president of the United States. That is extremely dangerous and has to end, which is why this guy needs to be fired. Doesn't matter how wonderful he was in his career. This is what he's become because he thinks he's too powerful. He thinks he's more powerful than anyone else, and that's all that matters. That is a dangerous thing, a dangerous thing. So next up, podcast listeners, inflation is here to stay. You're going to really appreciate this segment because so many people have spoken about inflation, and rightfully so, but people don't understand what real inflation actually does or what it looks like. So in the Wall Street Journal, there is an op-ed, and it's called, "What if Inflation is Here to Stay?" It's an opinion piece. Are price increases transitory? Some of the factors driving them certainly aren't. And this particular piece is by William A. Galston. And we're going to play a bunch of clips from Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan about the time in the 1970s and early 80s when inflation was out of control. And what's amazing is almost every American that's around today, they've either forgotten it or they weren't around or they never studied it. They don't understand how bad and how destructive this was to the middle class and to our economy. So we're going to play some clips on that. So this particular piece, what if inflation is here to stay? Americans are worried about inflation. This was the #1 economic concern expressed in a recent survey from the Pew Research Center. Some 63% said they are very concerned about rising prices, especially food and consumer goods, compared with only 29% who are very concerned that Americans won't be able to find work. This focus on higher prices is easy to explain. Consumer inflation is running above 5%. It's above 5%. Wiping out nominal wage gains for low-income workers. So podcast listeners, if inflation is above 5% and you're a saver, you're someone who likes to save money, and you put the money in a bank, you're not even going to get close to 1%. Not even close. So your money is worth less by putting it in the bank. So what are you supposed to do with it? It's unbelievable. The Labor Department reports that businesses investing in their long-term production capacity are facing the largest price hikes since 1982. Since 1982. Okay? Which brings us to the historical facts in American history about what inflation looked like at a different time. And when you really think about it, they actually look very similar. They may be different times, but they both experience very similar economic turbulence. So first up, here's Jimmy Carter, President Jimmy Carter. In 1978, October of 1978, he actually had an entire press conference at the White House, and he gave a statement about inflation because that's how bad inflation was. Imagine that. You're sitting in the Oval Office and you say to all the media, I need to make this statement about inflation because it's so incredibly bad. You know, there's so many other things he could make the case about, but he had to speak about inflation in 1978 because it was simply out of control. Here, ladies and gentlemen, is Jimmy Carter. Here's the clip.
Restraint involves tax policy as well as spending decisions. Tax reduction has never been more politically popular than it is today. But if future tax cuts are made rashly, with no eye on the budget deficits, they will hurt us all by causing more inflation. There are tax cuts which could directly lower costs and prices and help in the fight against inflation. I may consider ways to reduce those particular taxes while still cutting the budget deficit. But until we have a convincing prospect of controlling inflation, I will oppose any further reductions in federal income tax.
So that's Jimmy Carter. Can you imagine, by the way, any Democrat talking that way today, that he's concerned about the spending in government and its impact on inflation? Well, what about the spending today and its impact on inflation? Inflation is already at 5%. So Jimmy Carter had inflation in 78 that was simply out of control. There was a war, the Vietnam War. It had ended in the early 70s. But the spending for the Vietnam War was so out of control that the U.S. economy was in shambles for years and years later. Not unlike the war in Afghanistan that lasted for 20 years, and the spending was out of control. And now Democrats, as a result of COVID, want to spend more money than ever, and we haven't even recovered. We haven't even recovered from the previous spending sprees that have occurred both under Republican and Democrats' watch. So here's more from Jimmy Carter's anti-inflation speech. He's actually talking about taming government growth. That's how bad things were back then with inflation. So bad that a Democrat actually wanted to control the growth of government. We have that clip, and here it is.
To keep the government to a manageable size, I'm ordering tonight a cut in federal hiring. This order will mean a reduction of more than 20,000 in the number of permanent federal employees already budgeted for this fiscal year, and will cut the total size of the federal workforce. I've already placed a 5.5% cap on the pay increase for federal employees, and federal executive officers are receiving no pay increases at all.
Yeah, so that's Jimmy Carter in 1978 saying there is a hiring freeze in the federal government and a desire to reduce the government by 20,000 positions through attrition and other ways. That's how dangerous the United States economy was. That's how on a precipice, much of a precipice it was on of failing, just failing and falling apart because inflation was through the roof. Interest rates were through the roof. Government spending was out of control for well over a decade because of the Vietnam War and other reasons. And then you get Jimmy Carter there. He's a Democrat, and he's saying, we don't have any choice but to stop the growth of government because, you know, what else are we going to do? There's too much money out there in the economy. And that money that's out there in the economy is causing prices to go through the roof. So here's more from Jimmy Carter, where he says everything has a price, which is pretty remarkable when you compare it to today, which we will. Here's that clip.
But we must also realize that everything has a price and that consumers eventually pick up the tab. Where regulations are essential, they must be efficient. Where they fight inflation, they should be encouraged. Where they are unnecessary, they should be removed.
Everything has a price, Jimmy Carter said, and consumers pick up the price. So he's referring to government spending, and he's referring to inflation. Of course, trying to explain it away. I mean, obviously, his management of the economy was horrendous, which is why we got a Ronald Reagan. But if you compare what Jimmy Carter just said, everything has a price, to President Biden's recent tweet, where he says, my Build Back Better agenda costs $0. Instead of wasting money on tax breaks and loopholes and tax evasion, instead of like letting, those deplorables keep the money that they earn, those pesky people, and giving it to the wealthy, we can make a once-in-a-generation investment in working America, and it adds $0 to the national debt. I mean, that is the modern Democrat Party. Can you imagine anyone saying that ever? Compared to what Jimmy Carter, who was a liberal, right? The classic liberal back in the 1970s. And today, we don't have classic liberals. We have Democrat socialists. They are socialists. I'm not even sure they're democratic at all, but I think they're socialists. So Jimmy Carter lost his election in 1980 to Ronald Reagan. And Ronald Reagan, when he was inaugurated in January of 1981, the following month in February of 1981, he gave a speech about inflation, because obviously inflation carried all through the Carter years, his one term, his 4-year term, the Carter years in the late 70s, and carried into the Reagan years because Reagan was elected to fix the problem. And here's Reagan addressing the problem head on. We have that clip, and here it is.
20 years ago, in 1960, our federal government payroll was less than $13 billion. Today, it is $75 billion. During these 20 years, our population has only increased by 23.3%. The federal budget has gone up 528%. Now, we've just had 2 years of back-to-back double-digit inflation. 13.3% in 1979, 12.4% last year. The last time this happened was in World War I. In 1960, mortgage interest rates averaged about 6%. They're 2.5 times as high now, 15.4%. The percentage of your earnings the federal government took in taxes in 1960 has almost doubled.
Yeah, so Ronald Reagan in 1981 had just been inaugurated, and he was sitting in the same Oval Office that Jimmy Carter had been sitting in just a couple of years later, talking about inflation. And there's Reagan basically taking inflation on head on. I mean, he's basically talking about inflation in 79 was 13.3%. And in 1980, inflation was 12.4%. Inflation today, podcast listeners, is 5% and rising. And interest rates in 1980 were 15.4%. 15.4%. And why is that? Because when the federal government keeps spending, it crowds out the ability of the average person to be able to borrow money. And in addition to that, when the federal government keeps spending and puts too much money into the economy, combined with the Federal Reserve, obviously, you have too much money in the economy and that results in inflation. I mean, kind of obvious. Well, here's Ronald Reagan in classic Reagan approach with communicating to people and showing them what real inflation looks like. This is what the Republican Party, really conservatives, as far as I'm concerned, not even Republicans, but conservatives, need to be doing today about inflation. Because the American people are really concerned about this. I am too. Here's Reagan in 1981 talking about what inflation really looks like. We have that clip, and here it is.
Let me try to put this in personal terms. Here is a dollar such as you earned, spent, or saved in 1960. And here is a quarter, a dime, and a penny. 36 cents. That's what this 1960 dollar is worth today. And at the present world inflation rate, and our rate should continue 3 more years, that dollar of 1960 will be worth a quarter. What initiative is there to save? And if we don't save, we're short of the investment capital needed for business and industry expansion.
The American people want predictability. Why would the American people ever save money if they thought their money would eventually be worthless by the time they got to retirement? Why would they do that? How could they do that? How could they survive into retirement? This was a big issue in the late 1970s and the 1980s, and it ushered in a conservative era in America with Ronald Reagan, where people realized that actually math matters. Math actually matters. And fast forward today, we don't have Democrat politicians who believe that math matters. And Reagan did such a commonsensical way of showing people, here's a dollar, and he pulled out the dollar in the Oval Office. You know, in a couple of years, it's going to be worth a quarter based on what it was worth in 1960. But it's rapidly being worth less because of government, not because of you, because of government. That's happening today, podcast listeners. Here's Senator Patty Murray on the Senate floor just yesterday speaking about the debt ceiling. Now, remember, Congress can't borrow above the debt ceiling unless they raise the debt ceiling. And raising the debt ceiling requires a vote. The Republicans are not voting to increase the debt ceiling. Democrats are obviously furious because they're like, we need to continue to borrow to spend. And, because there's no, people are going to die if we don't spend. This is the same old Democrat crap. People will die if we don't spend more money. Honestly, no one believes this anymore. No one. But Senator Patty Murray, who is a socialist, is nonetheless on the Senate floor, of course, trashing Republicans about the debt ceiling and learned nothing from the Reagan years, even though she's old enough to remember them. Here she is. We have that clip, and here it is.
Senate Democrats just gave Republicans yet another opportunity to do the right thing, to make sure the United States government pays its bills, like every working family in our country does. Now, Senate Republicans have acknowledged that even though default would be catastrophic for our economy, they would not vote to prevent it. No Republican votes or help to prevent an economic catastrophe. And now they've kicked their brinkmanship up another notch by blocking Democrats only, from voting to avoid default with a purely Democratic vote. This makes no sense if you truly care about our workers, about our families, about our hard-won economic recovery. It only makes sense if their goal is economic sabotage, if they're so willing to put politics first that you'd put the American economy on the line. And that, Mr. President, is apparently what the Republican Party stands for today, until proven otherwise. Economic sabotage and politics first, no matter who gets hurt. This is a disgrace. It's an embarrassment. But it's not going to stop Democrats from fighting to protect our economy from the devastating consequences of default. Because let me be clear, Republicans may think this is some obscure fight right now, but it will not be if it hits American bank accounts. And they are fooling themselves if they think people won't know who's responsible.
So that's Senator Patty Murray of Washington State saying that the world is going to fall apart because the Republicans won't vote for the debt ceiling. By the way, the Democrats have the numbers to raise the debt ceiling in both the House and the Senate. They don't need the Republicans to raise the debt ceiling. And the Democrats own this debt ceiling increase, and they own the spending, and they own the inflation, which they are causing. And so here she is doing the same old Democrat talking point, and people are not going to be able to work, and they're not going to be able to get all the child care and so forth that they need. Folks, what difference does any of that make if your dollar is worth less and less as a result of all the spending that they're taking on? And moreover, this debt ceiling issue, it's the equivalent of saying, hey, look, we're going to go out and spend as much money as we want, and by the way, I need you to be responsible for going and getting the loan to pay for it. And then you look at the person, you say, well, wait a minute, you spent the money. Why would I go get the loan, right? Why would I raise the money by borrowing the money at a bank to pay off all of the debt that you've incurred because you don't know how to control your spending? That's exactly what the Democrats are saying. They're saying, we want to keep spending. Hey, Republicans, raise the debt ceiling so we can keep spending. The Republicans are saying, no, we don't want to do that because you're out of control. And, at least the Republicans are doing something now, but the Democrats can easily do this because they have the numbers. They have the numbers. So I actually think it's entirely possible, podcast listeners, that inflation is here to stay, and that we're also seeing the beginning of the spiking of interest rates as well, which of course would look just like the 1970s, stagflation, high interest rates for borrowing and high inflation. In which case, how do you get out of that, right? You get out of that by controlling the size of government and paring it back significantly. And that is a very unpopular thing to do unless you have the communication skills of a Ronald Reagan. And I'm not really sure who out there in the Republican Party or in the conservative movement has that ability right now. Maybe Governor DeSantis of Florida is probably the closest that we have as far as I'm concerned. So next up, podcast listeners, we have the dumbest bill in America. And do we have a lead up, Mr. Producer? Here it is. And it is the dumbest bill in America, and it is banning the term husband and wife from marriage licenses. Yes, you heard that correctly. Banning the term husband and wife from marriage licenses. House Bill 449 in Maryland, introduced by Delegate Sandy Bartlett. It's a lady from, I think, Anne Arundel County. She introduced a bill in the state of Maryland, House Bill 449, which effectively removes and bans the terms husband and wife from marriage licenses. You can't put those names in there anymore. And so, podcast listeners, I have to say this. I was in the House of Delegates when the gay community wanted, and the gay and lesbian community wanted, what they called marriage equality. All right? This is important about this particular bill, House Bill 449. So a number of years ago, the gay and lesbian community said they didn't want civil unions. They didn't want legislation that gave them civil unions in marriage licenses. What they wanted was their unions to be called marriage. So that's why they called it marriage equality. It was the fight for marriage equality, right? And so fast forward just a number of years later, those same individuals are saying, well, we wanted marriage equality, but we don't want there to be a husband and wife. just makes no sense, right? I mean, it really doesn't. And so, folks, I have a clip from this hearing, and I just want to explain that the bill says that instead of using husband and wife, you have to use party one and party two. Party one and party two. So here it is. So they deleted the word husband from the marriage certificate and put party one, and deleted wife from the marriage certificate and put party two. And then in addition to that, the bill allows these records to be kept electronically. So they're kept electronically, which means that, of course, they can have them online, you can search them, and they can also keep them and keep the copies of the licenses on the cloud and so forth if you need a copy of your license, your marriage license at some point in the future, which, by the way, we might as well not call it a marriage license then, because that's just my personal opinion. So anyway, here is a clip from the hearing. There's always a public hearing of a bill, House Bill 449 in Maryland. We have a clip in the hearing where the clerk of the court of Anne Arundel County, Maryland, is talking about, well, we really need this electronic records part. But of course, he basically, tries to not even talk about the party one, party two part. And Delegate Dan Cox, who's a Republican from Western Maryland, asks the question and provides a pretty reasonable approach to making everybody happy. Well, we have that clip, and here it is.
We're also keeping all the court records electronically too. And all the court records are backed up with the equal amounts of care to make sure that we do not lose any of the records. With regard to the party one, party two, it would, right now it's just a cleanup. The other forms that Maryland are using already say party one, party two. That way it doesn't discriminate with regard to husband and wife. You can use either. So it's just meant to be neutral, is what I would say.
If I could just real quick follow up on that. I mean, my concern is that it actually does discriminate against those who wish in their marriage records for posterity, to be listed as husband and wife. I mean, it's a huge change. I just wanted to clarify that. I think it'd be better. I don't have a problem with having an opt-in to party one, party two, particularly in the area of marriage. But thanks so much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
So that was Delegate Dan Cox at the end saying, I don't have a problem with there being an opt-in of marriage licenses of party one, party two. But why would you completely and utterly eliminate the terms husband and wife? And here, podcast listeners, is the issue that I have with the idea of getting rid of husband and wife. And that is, as soon as there are children involved, which they are more often involved than not in marriages, you do need a father and you do need a mother. The father's the husband and the mother is the wife. And yet so many people are trying to eliminate that. And this is exactly what's destroying our country right now. Namely, that children don't have a father figure. So many of them do not. And so many other children do not have a mother figure. They need both a father and a mother in the household, ideally, and in a perfect world. And when there's a divorce involved, obviously, you still want the same parents to be involved, even if they are divorced. That would be a good thing. So getting rid of husband and wife actually does not strengthen marriages in the state of Maryland, let alone anywhere else where they're trying to do this. It actually makes it a lot harder as far as I'm concerned, and also opens the door, podcast listeners, for there to be a party number three. Remember, there's a party one and a party two for husband and wife. Well, soon the same woke Democrats are going to say, well, why can't we have a party three too? I mean, we want marriage equality. It's incredible. I guarantee you it's coming. And House Bill 449 in the state of Maryland, not only did it pass, but it is now the law of the state. The law of the state. So no longer are you husband and wife, you're party one and party two. And that's it for Mark and the Millennials, and that's the dumbest bill in America. Thank you for joining Mark and the Millennials. This is Mark Fisher. Thank you to our producer, Christopher Hopkins. Check us out on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Parler, Rumble, and our website. See you next time.